What if I told you that one sentence, spoken in a calm, steady voice, completely dismantled a US senator on live television? And that it wasn't just a debate. It was a moment that silenced a nation, exploded across the internet, and changed the conversation about truth in politics forever? Stay with me, because what happened next, no one saw coming. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. It was supposed to be just another Thursday night. The air in Denver felt unusually heavy that evening, like the atmosphere knew something the rest of us didn't. In a modest studio nestled among the rising spires of the downtown skyline, stage lights flickered to life. The countdown had begun for what was expected to be another civil, if routine, episode of American Pulse Roundtable, a political debate show known more for its calm tone than its ability to shake the national psyche. But something felt different. Across the country, millions of TVs flickered on, fingers hovered over phones ready to tweet the night's talking points. The guest list was familiar. Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio, a conservative firebrand known for clean rhetoric and sharper jabs, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, a rising progressive force with a quiet reputation for devastating clarity. They had shared stages before, but not like this. Mason Rayner, the longtime host of the show, paced backstage with the kind of nervous energy that producers mistake for intuition. He'd seen hundreds of debates, but tonight his gut told him to brace. "Let them talk," he whispered to his assistant before heading to the podium. "The truth always finds its way out." Inside the studio, a kind of quiet anticipation gripped the room. J.D. Vance arrived in a crisp navy suit, camera ready, chin raised, smile loaded. He carried the air of a man expecting to dominate. Jasmine Crockett entered minutes later, dressed in deep burgundy, no notes in hand, only a calm that bordered on unnerving. She glanced once at the lights above and took her seat like someone who wasn't just ready to speak, but ready to reveal. No one watching could have predicted what was about to happen. Not the host, not the producers, not even the seasoned pundits analyzing pre-show strategy. Because what started as a policy discussion would soon unravel into something far more raw, a confrontation not just of facts, but of reality itself. And when the red light above the camera blinked on, the country leaned forward, not to hear debate, but to witness a reckoning. J.D. Vance spoke first, he always did. With the assured cadence of a man who had recited these lines 100 times behind closed doors, he leaned forward and painted a picture of broken cities and wasted budgets. Words like accountability and urban decay spilled from his lips in a tone carefully measured, framed for impact. He referenced numbers, but only the kind that reinforced his narrative: violence, dropout rates, failing institutions. He barely blinked, confident in the choreography of his argument. But as he spoke, Jasmine Crockett sat silent, not passive, watching. Her eyes didn't wander, her posture didn't shift. She wasn't waiting to respond. She was waiting for something to expose itself. And it did. Vance concluded with a tidy line. "The problem isn't funding, it's culture." That's when Crockett moved. She didn't raise her voice, didn't pull out charts. She didn't need to. Her voice was calm, her words precise, and they landed like scalpels. "When you talk about these cities," she began, "you're not talking about brick and concrete. You're talking about people. You're talking about families, black families, brown families, grandmothers raising their daughters' kids, people trying to survive systems that were never built for them to thrive in. It wasn't a rebuttal, it was an autopsy. J.D. Vance laughed, a small, sharp chuckle. "You're making it about race," he said, brushing it off. But he was already off balance. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You mention crime in Chicago, but not where the guns come from. You talk about failing schools, but ignore who stripped their funding. You treat it like math. I live it like reality." There was no shouting, no name-calling, just truth, delivered in full sentences, in full control. The room began to shift. Even Mason Rayner, trained to disappear into neutrality, sat up straighter. This wasn't talking points. This was experience. This was a perspective not distilled from polling memos, but forged in communities that politicians visit for photo ops and leave behind in policy. The clash wasn't between ideologies, it was between projection and presence. J.D. Vance brought bullet points, Jasmine Crockett brought receipts. And as the tension thickened, something quietly historic was beginning to take shape. There are moments in live television when time slows, not because of a glitch, not because of silence, but because something undeniable has just been said, something that can't be walked back, can't be spun, and won't be forgotten. That moment came 38 minutes into the debate, when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, locked eyes with J.D. Vance and said, "You can't cherry-pick the truth when it's convenient, Senator, especially when real lives are at stake." The room froze. Mason Rayner, seasoned as he was, didn't move. The crew behind the glass, trained to stay focused no matter the chaos, leaned in unconsciously. You could hear the hum of studio lights, the faint creak of someone shifting in their chair. It wasn't noise, it was something deeper, a kind of collective exhale that hadn't yet come. J.D. Vance blinked. He wasn't ready. Not for that sentence, not for the weight it carried. He tried to mask the flicker of panic with a smirk, but it didn't land. For the first time all night, his posture shrank. He gripped the edge of the desk as if grounding himself, but his words no longer followed the script. "You don't know what I care about," he said, voice tight. "You sit here with your outrage like that makes you right." Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She just waited. And then she said the one thing that collapsed the entire scaffolding he'd built around himself. "I don't have to yell to be heard, but when I speak, I don't pretend I'm not talking about pain." The audience at home heard it. They felt it. And within seconds, so did the internet. Hashtags erupted, clips were trimmed mid-broadcast, and viewers flooded platforms with their reactions. But inside that studio, it wasn't the viral moment that mattered. It was the silence. Because in that stillness, something profound had shifted. J.D. Vance had been debating policy. Jasmine Crockett had been telling the truth. And the room, every inch of it, knew the difference. By the time the segment faded to commercial, the internet had already moved faster than the broadcast could catch up. It didn't wait for closing statements. It didn't wait for analysis. The moment Jasmine Crockett's voice cut through the air, slicing cleanly through deflection and posture, a digital current ignited that would spread further than any campaign had ever could. The clip surfaced on X, formerly Twitter, within seconds. Then came the reaction stitches on TikTok, the reposts on Instagram stories, the slow claps on Reddit threads under headlines like, "She didn't debate, she diagnosed." Hashtags erupted. Truth over tactics. Crockett unfiltered. She brought receipts. But what surprised people most wasn't just the speed, it was the depth. This wasn't the usual performative frenzy. People weren't sharing for shock value. They were sharing because they recognized something painfully real. In a coffee shop in Philadelphia, a group of community organizers huddled around a laptop and replayed the exchange 3 times in silence before anyone spoke. In Houston, a high school teacher rewrote the next day's civics lesson, to open with Jasmine's quote. In Milwaukee, a retired bus driver recorded a selfie video, eyes glistening, saying, "She told the truth like it wasn't a risk. That's what shook me." Back in Denver, the control room descended into chaos, not panic, but stunned realization. Mason Rayner's phone buzzed endlessly. A junior producer whispered, "We didn't just host a debate, we opened a door." J.D. Vance's team scrambled. He cancelled a scheduled appearance on a major podcast, citing the need to refocus. His communications director released a short statement blaming online distortion. But it was too late. The moment had already outgrown him. He was no longer at the center. He was a symbol of everything Jasmine had quietly, surgically dismantled. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate. She met with her staff in a modest green room and simply said, "Let's talk about housing numbers tomorrow." She wasn't looking to trend. She was thinking 3 steps ahead. But across the country, people were still watching, not the fallout, but the clarity. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't just hearing a politician speak. They were watching someone get heard. The ripple didn't stop at the studio doors. What had happened in that 20-minute stretch between commercial breaks began seeping into spaces that debates rarely reach. In a Detroit high school, a social studies teacher replaced the day's worksheet with a clip of Jasmine Crockett's now viral exchange and asked the class, "What does it look like when someone challenges the script?" In Sacramento, a group of college students launched a campus-wide speaker series called Policy and Presence, using Crockett's performance as its first case study. But the shift wasn't just academic. It was emotional. It was cultural. For many, it felt like a long-withheld breath had finally been released. In communities where truth had been softened, muted, or ignored, her calm defiance was oxygen. In Washington, the political fallout had only just begun. J.D. Vance's team tried to regain control with carefully edited interviews and damage control segments, but the weight of what had been exposed wouldn't lift. Behind closed doors, donors expressed doubt. A moderate senator withdrew support for a joint education proposal, citing concerns about public perception. His party whispered not about his policies, but about his poise. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett refused to weaponize the moment. She declined a dozen high-profile interviews. Instead, she flew to Atlanta and spent her weekend in a small community church, speaking to local leaders about food insecurity and maternal health. No cameras, no press, just presence. "We don't need louder voices," she told the congregation. "We need deeper listening." What she'd done wasn't just win a debate, it was redefine its purpose. She reminded the country that being heard wasn't about volume or clever comebacks. It was about showing up with the truth, unshaken, even when it wasn't welcome. And as the headlines faded, something more powerful settled in: memory. A nation used to political theater had witnessed something different. A person who walked into a room full of expectations and left behind something rare. Not a viral moment, a mirror. And once a mirror is held up that clearly, it becomes harder for the country to look away or to pretend they didn't see. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just spoken, she'd shifted the frequency, and people, at last, were tuning in. In the aftermath of one of the most talked-about televised political debates in recent memory, the story of Jasmine Crockett stood out not because she yelled the loudest or interrupted the most, but because she didn't. She sat across from a seasoned opponent, J.D. Vance, and without theatrics, delivered something far more disarming: clarity. Her strength wasn't in her volume, it was in her steadiness. While her counterpart relied on scripted talking points and vague cultural references, Crockett reached for the uncomfortable truths that others avoided. Not just statistics, but stories. Not just facts, but lived reality. What made this moment unforgettable wasn't that Crockett won a debate, it was that she shattered an illusion. In a political culture so often built on polish and positioning, she reminded viewers that authenticity, when paired with preparation, has the power to disarm even the most media-savvy of opponents. When she said, "You can't cherry-pick the truth when it's convenient, especially when real lives are at stake," she wasn't just scoring a rhetorical point, she was exposing the cost of selective narratives. But perhaps the most remarkable part came after the cameras stopped rolling. While the internet exploded with praise, memes, and endless reposts of the viral clip, Crockett didn't pivot toward the spotlight. She turned her focus toward the people. While Vance scrambled for PR strategy, she sat in church halls and school auditoriums, turning that moment into movement. Her story reminded us that true leadership isn't about commanding a room, it's about changing it. So what can we take from this? The lesson is simple, but profound. Speak truth, even when it's inconvenient. In a world full of noise, precision is power. In conversations at work, at home, or in our communities, we're often tempted to soften or sidestep uncomfortable truths to keep the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's avoidance. Crockett's calm defiance challenges us to use our voice not to dominate, but to illuminate. Not to win, but to wake people up. Here's a simple way to practice that today. The next time you're in a conversation where someone generalizes or oversimplifies a complex issue, pause, ask a question, offer a perspective that digs deeper. You don't need a platform to speak truth. You just need the courage to say, "That's not the whole story." Now let's test how closely you were paying attention. Quiz time. What was Jasmine Crockett's most powerful quote during the debate that went viral? A. You don't know what I care about. B. You can't cherry-pick the truth when it's convenient, especially when real lives are at stake. Drop your answer A or B in the comments. And now we want to hear from you. What did this story mean to you? Have you ever witnessed someone calmly speak a truth that shifted the room? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can all learn from each other. If this story moved you, helped you reflect, or gave you new perspective, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's your support that fuels us to bring you more voices, more truths, and more stories that matter. Until next time, stay clear, stay strong, and stay loud in your own quiet way.